Hey class, we are buckled down. We're about to take spiritual formation into the 21st century. We're going to be talking about spiritual formation in terms of neuroscience and brain plasticity and other fun topics. In all seriousness, this is really important. This is the stuff I care deeply about right now that I'm reading and trying to write about. This week you'll actually be reading some of my writing. It's a work in progress. I'm just going to warn you, but you won't be reading that yet. What you're going to be reading for the first few days of this week is a book called Train Your Mind, Change Your Brain. It's by Sharon Begley. I have created a few PDF files. So you've got two different PDF files from this book that you'll be reading and then doing reading reflections on. I realized that in the PDF files, I didn't give you the bibliographic information, so in case you wanted to buy the book or if you want to cite the book in a paper or something, here's the cover, so you can see the relevant information there. Maybe you have to replay this to get that. And then the inside cover, which gives you the year of publication and the publisher and all that. So this book is wonderful. It's really manageable. You may have already done the reading before you listened to this lecture. I hope you found it to be tangible. Science can be intimidating for a lot of people, especially neuroscience. I am not a neuroscientist, so like you, the terminology is often lost on me. Somatic markers and frontal lobes and hypothalamus and all that stuff. I feel like Sharon does a great job of, even though the terminology is not familiar, I get the concepts. I understand what the different research is showing, what the different experiments show. I think she pieces it together well, and so I hope you felt the same. If not, maybe this lecture will help some. So what I want you to be thinking about as you go through this particular week and through this week's reading is, how does this information that we're learning in neuroscience, how is this relevant for virtue, the cultivation of character, what we've been talking about in the first 7 weeks, and how might this be relevant for spiritual formation more broadly, right? Why should we be learning this stuff in a class like this, in a program like this? I think it's vital. I think it's so relevant. I want you to be thinking about that. Early on in my lectures, I'm not just going to spoon feed it to you. I'm going to make this pretty short. I want you to struggle with the reading, and with the reading reflection, I think you're going to do a great job. If you start to struggle individually, send me emails, let me know. But I'm going to sort of give a brief introduction today. My next lecture will be a little longer. But again, why am I learning this? What is this? How does this relate to what we've been covering, what we've been learning about, right? Okay. So, introduction to the topic, and this is related mostly to the first reading that you're doing. Let me just give you a disclaimer up front. This book focuses on the relationship between neuroscience and Buddhism. That's sort of the core topic of the whole book. If that makes you uncomfortable, then the reading is going to make you somewhat uncomfortable. Let me defend it. Let me try to justify this. I would love to assign a book that deals with the relationship between neuroscience and Christianity, but none of those, the number of books on that topic are really limited, and they're not nearly as good as this particular text for several reasons. One is that over a decade ago, the Dalai Lama started bringing in scientists once a year to Tibet and working with them and dealing with them and asking questions about various topics, bringing in experts. He started having his monks come to the United States and get MRI scans of their brains before and after meditative states. During meditative states, we're getting a lot of information about neural activity in the monk's brain and how that works. How does meditation affect them? He's been sort of on the forefront, really interested in how this science impacts Buddhist spirituality. But as a result, we have a lot more information related to neuroscience and Buddhism. We don't have nearly as much related to neuroscience and Christianity, although that's developing. So I chose this text and this topic because we just have more data. So that makes the conclusion stronger. I don't want this to make you nervous. I'm not trying to push Buddhism on you. What I would like, my goal, my emphasis is to say, okay, if Buddhist spiritual practices relate to neuroscience in this way, there's probably a good chance that Christian spiritual practices relate to neuroscience in a similar way. If Buddhist meditation impacts us in certain ways, the brain in certain ways, Christian prayer might impact us in similar ways, right? So I'm trying to create a parallel between spiritual formation in a Christian context and spiritual formation in a Buddhist context. There's lots of dissimilarities, but as it relates to neuroscience, I think there's some connections. So I don't want you to get caught up in, oh my gosh, this is a different religion other than Christianity. Rather, hopefully the science speaks for itself. The chapters I chose don't emphasize Buddhism as much, but one of the sections in my paper does. It focuses almost exclusively on Buddhist meditation and the research we have stemming from that. But again, I think we can draw direct parallels to Christian prayer and other things. So one of the big debates within neuroscience was, is the brain hardwired or is it malleable? Is it plastic? And early on the idea was that it was hardwired. And what that meant is, when I move my hands, things are happening in my brain, right? There's a certain area of the brain that's active, certain synapses firing. Well, then they would map it. And they would say, oh, well, this area of the brain is related to movement of the hand. And the idea was, that's all that part of the brain did. And if that part of the brain was damaged, I wouldn't be able to move my hands that well. And evidence seemed to bear that out. When you had brain injuries that related to the portion of your brain dealing with memory, you would have memory loss, right? When you had portions of the brain damaged dealing with motor skills, your motor skills would be negatively affected. And so the idea was, well, the brain's not that malleable, especially after a particular age, right? It was usually set pretty early, late teens, early 20s. After that, you're done. But new evidence has come about to say this is not true, that the brain is much more malleable than we once thought. And so the book is a long 300-page argument providing tons of evidence to try to say, look, we've done experiments on monkeys, we've done experiments on humans. Over and over again, it seems that the brain shifts. The area of the brain that was once dedicated to my fingers might redirect itself and start being related to the movement of my feet, right? So we have experiments with monkeys where they'll sever nerves in the hands so no signals get sent from the hands to the brain. Suddenly that area of the brain, which should be dark, over time will start to connect to movements of the face or movements of the feet. It changes, it reshapes itself. And the idea is this indicates that the brain continues to adapt to the information it's given based on our environment and our actions, what we surround ourselves with and what we do. They have really interesting data of people born blind. The area of the brain that's normally in charge of the optical nerve will be used for other things, like the fingertips when that blind person reads Braille. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. But the basic point, and this is what I hope you at least get out of it, right, at the very least, is that our brains are not set in stone, that they adapt to the information presented to it. So if I begin to learn a new language and surround myself in that language and culture and begin to speak it and do these things over and over, the language portions of my brain will change as a result of that new input. They will adapt. That part of my brain might actually even grow, right? Cover more area, the activity related to language. And so be thinking about how this might be important for what we've been talking about, and for spiritual formation more generally. Here's a quote right from page 8. The actions we take can literally expand or contract different regions of the brain, Pour more juice into quiet circuits and damp down activity in buzzing ones. Several examples are presented. Violin players. Violin players, they use their fingers, right, a lot, and they need to be very dexterous with their fingers to play the violin. The area, if you take a professional violin player and look at their brain activity as compared to someone like me who doesn't play an instrument, the area of the brain dedicated to finger dexterity is larger. It takes up more space because of what they've done. Their brain has changed as a result. I already mentioned earlier in a different lecture the idea of cab drivers in London. When you look at their brains, the area of the brain dedicated to spatial intelligence and direction is larger than non-cab drivers because of what they do on a daily basis, having to navigate through complicated city streets. Fascinating, right? Fascinating. This is even deeper, right? But there are also hints, this is a quote from Begley, there are also hints that mind sculpting can occur with no input from the outside world. Action, circumstances, etc. That is, the brain can change as a result of the thoughts we have thought. Page 9. Now, she gives the example, they've done research on piano players, people practicing the piano. And they'll take different groups of people who are learning the piano, and one group they'll have them practice by actually playing the piano. The other group they'll have them practice by sitting, meditating, and just thinking about the keys, where their fingers would have to be going over the music. And they would just imagine themselves playing the piece that they're supposed to practice. And sure enough, the same brain regions that are highlighted when you're actually playing are highlighted just thinking about playing the song and the keys. And that kind of mental activity can shape our brains as well. It's not just what we do, also what we think. Very interesting, right? And so, as we move forward in the course, and especially with regard to your first reading reflection, I want you to be thinking about this, right? What's the relevance here? This might be pretty profound. How might this reshape our view of spiritual formation? Can we give specific examples to show how this might be important? I hope this helps as just a short introduction. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will see you online.